Welcome to Real Talk in ELT, a podcast that talks about the reality of teaching English. Okay, well, welcome back to another episode of Real Talk in ELT, and I am very honored to be sitting here today with Mr. Michael Swan. Hello, sir.
Hi.
And I'm going to give you a proper introduction for those of you who don't already know. Michael Swan is a writer specializing in English language teaching and reference materials. His many publications include Practical English Usage from Oxford University Press, the Cambridge English Course Series with Catherine Walter, and we might get into that today, and also with Catherine Walter, the Oxford English Grammar course. Michael's interests include pedagogic grammar, mother tongue influence in second language acquisition, and the relationship between applied linguistic theory and classroom language teaching practice. He has had extensive experience with adult learners and has worked with teachers in many countries. So, officially welcome. And you were very generous to share your 2018 paper entitled First Person Singular. Can I just ask how you came up with the title? I love the title, but First Person Singular, why?
That's not my title. It's the journal that I wrote it for.
Okay.
Has a regular feature called First Person Singular.
Oh, okay.
And getting people giving accounts of their own careers, and that's the title they gave me.
Oh, love it. I was like, no, that makes sense. Okay, it's great. It's wonderful. And
my own title was Consumer's View of Applied Linguistics.
Consumer's View, yes, because there's on the paper it's like 3 different ones, so you can never really distinguish who wrote what. But you generously gave me that, and I wanted to go into some of the topics that you had written about because I think that they're very, very interesting. And the first one, which is kind of the beginning, more towards the beginning of your career, and according to the article, you said you sidestepped into teaching and researching. And after learning your trade a little bit, you made the move to Paris. And I think you were there for about 5 years, correct me if I'm wrong. And
7 years, yeah.
7, okay. And at the beginning of the communicative language teaching era. And so being in the foreign country, kind of switching gears in terms of the new kids on the block methodology, what did that look like for you?
Well, it's kind of complicated. Communicative language teaching came in as a kind of revolution. Well, quite some time before I moved to Paris, but I was busy doing my own thing. I was running a language school and doing the kind of teaching that I had worked out for myself. And my main response to the communicative language teaching development at that point was quite critical. We were getting a lot of books written by applied linguists, telling teachers how to do their jobs in the light of the latest theory. And these books were not quite impenetrable, but they were hard work for your ordinary teacher. My memory is of an imaginary book which was called A Communicative Teaching of Language for Communication in a Communicative Classroom. That was what they all seemed like.
A little bit of a tongue twister there.
But when I moved to Paris, I had a lot more spare time. I wasn't running a language school anymore, more time to think about things. Paris was a good place for learning about new developments. The British Council in Paris at that time had a very good program of having guest speakers over from Britain and other places who were putting forward their views of what was happening, what should be happening now. And there's a sense in which I suppose that was where I got my teacher training, when I had enough time to pay attention to other people instead of just working out my own ideas, and time to think about it all.
It's interesting because do you see that reflected as it went through going through your career, that there was always this new methodology or idea that came in and, you know, butted up against what people thought or what people were doing, and there's this resistance towards it, because I see it constantly nowadays.
Oh yes. I think I probably went through 5 language teaching revolutions during my career. Every now and then, a large new theory would come in, telling us what we should be doing and what we should stop doing. And my feeling was one of interest tempered with suspicion. It was always interesting to look at new ideas that come from researchers or come from other people who've got a lot of experience. There's always something to learn from a new idea. On the other hand, they do tend to take over and become something, they can become something like a dogma, so that one is supposed to do what fits in with the new theory and supposed to stop doing what doesn't fit in. And my feeling generally was, do the new things if they work for you, but don't stop doing the old things if they work for you as well. I do feel that theories in our field, perhaps altogether in the social sciences, theories, hypotheses and theories turn into dogmas and doctrines. And then you get what I call gurus, the prophets, who get up on platforms and speak very, very convincingly about how you should be teaching like this. And they always have followers, disciples, candle lighting disciples, if you like.
Yes, there are people within the field that are almost worshipped for these new ideas. And well, not to take away from any of that, research and thinking that they've clearly done, and they want to put forward, something new and try out something new for the betterment of the field. At some point, we can't throw the baby out with the bathwater, though, right? And that's the general tendency. If something new comes along, we just discard everything that we've been using up until this point.
Yeah. In one of my first articles, written sometime in the very early 80s, I suppose, I wrote that the characteristic sound of a language teaching revolution is a scream and a splash, as once again the baby is thrown out with the bathwater.
It's true. It's true.
I wrote a lot critically in that area. In a sense, I was two different people, because I was a practicing classroom teacher, being extremely positive as much as I could, and a consumer of applied linguistics, being a good deal more negative. Particularly in the early days, books were being written by applied linguists who didn't actually have very much classroom experience, but had a lot of theory under their belts. And I found that quite damaging.
Can you expand on that? I mean, if you want to, but because this does come up in your article as well, that almost the forgotten practitioner, that sometimes we get so wrapped up, and I see this happening nowadays. And I know that you're removed from the area, a little bit removed from the industry, but in terms of conferences and webinars and talks and all of those things that we typically participate in for professional development purposes, I do see that we talk a lot nebulously of theories and good practice, but it's very much not made into something tangible that the ordinary practitioner can then take this beautiful idea and theory that's being talked about, and what do I do with that?
Well, I agree. One test that I tried to keep operating when I was teaching is, at the end of a lesson, what do they know now, or what can they do better now that they didn't know or couldn't do before? what exactly have they got out of it? Why did I do this? And I feel this quite strongly about skills-focused teaching. People talk a lot about the need to teach skills, and this is something we do, isn't it? We teach skills. We have the 4 skills, we teach them. And you need to keep asking why. What am I getting out of this? If I'm teaching reading skills, if I think I'm teaching reading skills, what reading skills do they actually need? Which ones haven't they got? And is the text exercise that I'm doing in this lesson going to give them what they need? I think you need very carefully focused why questions about what you're doing. Equally at the other end of the scale in grammar teaching, okay, I've spent 3 lessons on English relative clauses. Why do we actually need them? So,
to what end have we gotten? So, at the end of this series, what have we gotten out of it, or what have the students particularly gotten out of that?
What have they got out of it? I think you need a very, very tight focus on students' needs, the needs of the particular students that you're teaching. These may be different from the needs envisaged by the people who wrote the article or the people who wrote the textbook. I could go on talking about this all night.
No, please feel free. And then, well, I mean, as you've had years of classroom practice, then how did you? Well, I guess we can kind of. I'm going to jump around in my talking points here. I think because you had years of classroom practice and you were trying to judiciously use the new theories, the new methods that were coming out, new techniques, while also balancing it with being careful. But then you've written course books yourself. You've used course books as a practitioner, and so. It would be interesting to hear your opinion on, did you as a practitioner use the course books exactly how they were intended, or did you modify them? And when you were writing your course book, how did you manage that, putting things together and making it coherent and cohesive?
As a practitioner, I threw out the course books.
Oh no, such a rebel. Okay.
But we're going back quite some decades. We're going back more than half a century here. And I was very contemptuous of the course books that were around, wrongly so up to a point, because they'd been quite carefully designed, systematically designed. They upset me because the figures in them, the pretend people in them, the Susan and Jack people, or whatever their names were cardboard cutouts. They were pretend, and they didn't seem to me to relate at all well to what the students actually wanted to be and talk about. So I was contemptuous of those. And later, when Catherine and I started writing our materials, one thing we wanted to get away from was this imaginary 2-dimensional student, and to write for students. Let me put it this way. We wanted to respect the language, we wanted to respect the student, and we wanted to respect the teacher. Respecting the language meant that we were not going to have a typical 1-syllabus course where everything was. The grammar syllabus was like a peg on which you hung everything else, or the communicative, the functions and notions, what we were supposed to be teaching, that was the peg and everything else got hung on that. And we wanted to balance form and use. We drew up a vocabulary syllabus, a grammar syllabus, a skills syllabus. If I think a bit, I can give you a complete list. The activity syllabus, we had quite a range of things which we felt should be ticked off, checked as we went through writing this stuff. So we were sure that the most basic vocabulary did actually get taught at the right time. Because people aren't going to learn it all by themselves. unless they're helped, particularly people in low input situations.
Yes, you mentioned that. I do want you to expand on that, but you can finish this thought. But the low
Yeah.
input and how that
So
affects.
we had what we called a multi-syllabus course,
Okay.
where we were putting in what we felt was enough of everything to satisfy the main priorities. We wanted activities which would work for some kind of students and activities which would work for other kind of students. Drama and role playing were a big thing to come in at that time. And that was great in my experience with students who liked drama and role playing. Other students didn't so much like that. They wanted to express themselves personally and directly, not by playing parts. And we tried to bring in activities that would satisfy both kinds. Different teachers are comfortable working in different ways. And we tried to make it possible for different kinds of teacher to do what they wanted to do using our materials. So that's a kind of global answer to your question. We were trying to keep everybody happy.
Right. But then keeping everybody happy, do you feel as if you had to, quote unquote, I guess we can say, sacrifice some things? Or by the end, I'm assuming that you were proud and happy of the materials that you produced. But did you feel that there was, because you kept everyone happy, maybe no one was happy?
No. Absolutely not.
Okay.
On the contrary.
Okay.
On the contrary, but we're trying to put in activities which would, in fact, keep this lot of people happy at this moment, that lot of people happy at that moment, maybe everybody reasonably happy. Our big criticism of the existing materials before we started this was they were so bland, so middle of the road, that they didn't actually keep anybody happy very much. They didn't offend anybody,
Okay.
didn't upset anybody.
Okay.
And one of our great concerns was that to make it possible for our students to learn by communicating with each other, and the key to the communicative approach, that's part of it. So we wanted students, even if they were practicing grammar, to be able to tell each other things that the others would be interested in, telling people things they don't know. That's what communication is. Just not just repeating sentences in a pattern drill.
Yes.
But
Mm-hmm.
there are bits of language that do need to be systematically practiced to get them right. And if you try to mix the systematic practice at the beginning with trying to get people communicating, it's too hard. So get people used to a structure if it needs that much work to get used to, and then get them doing something interesting with it.
Okay. And is that what you were referencing in some points of this article, and I think in general your feeling of the input poor, where we hyper focus too much on something being communicative, for example, but they don't actually. I think you used a brilliant analogy. It was about the house. That before we focused too much on the bricks and mortar, and we just gave them bricks and mortar and bricks and mortar, and not how to use it to build something. And then so they didn't actually construct the house. And then afterwards we were saying, okay, so this is a house, and then we never actually gave them the materials to be. Yeah. So it's this pendulum effect. And would you mind speaking about that? This idea
Happy
of the
to,
input
yeah.
poor.
Now this is one of the big bees I've got in my bonnet.
Ooh, good. I love bees and bonnets. Here we go.
I can give you lots of idioms if you like.
Oh, okay, great. Yes, you could just take an hour.
Yeah. My concern again and again, for quite some time now in language teaching, has been that we get students doing things, and we believe that they will learn from doing something. And they may not. they may spend a happy hour, a fun hour, doing an interesting activity with a good teacher, and they may actually not have learnt anything. They may have had a little fluency practice, perhaps, but again and again, particularly in skills lessons, I think people are they're very clear that they're doing things, but they're not so clear about what exactly they're teaching, why they're doing them. That's coming back to the why. And when I use the analogy of the pendulum, I don't think it's not as simple as that. But languages are double-sided. They're form and meaning. Getting things right on the one hand and doing interesting things with what you're getting right on the other. The whole opposition between form and use that runs through language. And at different periods in history, you tend to get too much focus on one or the other. So when I was first teaching, I was as guilty of this as anybody. I was very, very keen on teaching the forms, insisting that my students would get their grammar right, insisting that they got really good pronunciation. That was a big thing at the time. I suppose I went overboard for that. But the pendulum has swung away from form to use, and it's stayed there for a long time, I think. And that was a good thing up to a point. But you get people have a model, if you like, of experiential learning, where the students will learn from being exposed to language and doing things with it. And task-based learning, I've written about that, seems to me perhaps very appropriate in a learning situation where they've got a lot of input outside the classroom, they've got a lot of time. In a sense, immigrants ought to be speaking the language perfectly because they're doing task-based learning all the time. That's what immigrants do. But it doesn't seem to work like that.
No, no, it does not. My Portuguese is terrible. I've been living here for over a decade.
There you are, you see. I do feel that we've got what I call an input poor situation. You're typical of a lot of language teaching, not just English teaching, but a lot of language teaching all over the world. People have got maybe 3 hours a week in the class, maybe 30 weeks a year that can be used for the language teaching, 90 hours a year for 3 years, 270 hours. Well, how much are they going to learn from unstructured input and unstructured activity over that time? There's not enough input even to bring up all the structures and vocabulary people will need. And if they're just made to do tasks through that period, then where's the language for the tasks going to come from?
Right.
Some of the writing.
Go ahead, sorry.
Some of the writing about task-based teaching really, I ran across a quote somewhere where somebody said, yeah, this approach enables them to make good use of the language that they have. But the question is, where do they get the language that they have?
Right.
I've got a very simple principle that I keep mouthing off. Language teaching is teaching language. At the very base, if I want to learn, let's say, Japanese or Greek, I want somebody who's going to enable me to learn the grammar and the vocabulary and the pronunciation points that are most important for me as a learner of Greek. What is most important depends on who I am. And this is another fixation I have, that an awful lot of national language teaching programs are designed perhaps for one kind of learner. In France, the time I was there, language teaching was designed for the elite learners, the ones who were really bright, who were good linguists. They succeeded. And most of the kids failed. They came out of school after 5 years, more 7 years of English, couldn't speak a word. And they couldn't speak a word because they hadn't been given the kind of teaching that would be useful to them, to teach them to speak a word. I spoke to a German teacher who said that in the school where she was teaching, the methods used produced what she called error-free silence in the classroom.
Awesome.
Nobody made any mistakes because they didn't dare to open their mouths because they got corrected. I think in a lot of teaching situations I've encountered, you get what seems to me totally mindless perfectionism. The system, maybe the whole educational system, the trainers, the teachers who are there, act as if it was somehow possible to produce learners who are more or less like native speakers. And they make mistakes, they've got to get corrected, and so on and so on. I mean, this is totally crazy. People don't learn foreign languages perfectly. 1 in 1,000, perhaps. Why should they? Teachers, if they're teaching a language that isn't their own, don't teach it perfectly. They make mistakes. And I've come across teachers who are absolutely ashamed of themselves because they make mistakes. It's natural. That's what happens in foreign languages.
Absolutely. It happens all the time. It happens even native speakers.
What's wrong with it?
Yeah.
Nobody fusses about it except educational authorities.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
No. I think that kind of perfectionism is toxic. It has caused an awful lot of failed language teaching around the world. And what I would like to see myself is a range of language teaching programs for different kinds of people who have different kinds of need. Some learners do need a very, very accurate knowledge of the language that they're learning for work, maybe, or perhaps because they're going to be teachers. But most learners don't want that much. They want some kind of middle of the road capacity so that they can use the language effectively, that they can get right the bits that matter. And you have to ask which bits of the grammar matter, which bits of the pronunciation matter. Those are the ones that need to get taught, and maybe not necessarily the others.
Well, there has been a big push. I mean, it's late coming to Brazil, but with the English as a lingua franca movement, and of course before that there was David Crystal in the World Languages and all of that. So there has been a shift towards it, and I really kind of identify and align with you in this. We teach language, right? That's what we should be doing in the classroom, and from my experience, just as an anecdotal thing, is that when I train or work with teachers that come from educational backgrounds, they've gone to university and studied linguistics and all of that good stuff, they're very focused on accuracy. Everything has to be
on
accuracy.
Oh, yeah.
Everything has to be perfect. It has to be perfect, and it has to be very almost academic. And when I deal with teachers who come from other industries, maybe they've worked in business and then they're changing careers, they're very focused almost to a detriment on it needs to be for communicative purposes, just fluency only. It doesn't matter if they make a lot of mistakes, but at some point it does. It seems as if we have to find a better middle ground here.
The question is which mistakes matter.
Right.
I think in English as a lingua franca, I mean, this is interesting. It's done an awful lot of good, despite the fact that it's a lot of what its proponents have written about it is, let's say,
misinterpreted, possibly.
I wouldn't say misinterpreted so much in some of the cases as impossible to interpret sensibly.
Okay.
I'm sorry. I've been quite rude in print about the ELF in theory, if you like, the theoretical side of it. From a practical point of view, it's doing an enormous amount of good. It's taking the focus away from accuracy for its own sake. Mm-hmm. In pronunciation, Jenny Jenkins and other people have done really interesting work on trying to decide which points of pronunciation matter and which don't. So, I mean, looking purely at speakers of Brazilian Portuguese, there are aspects of pronunciation that matter a whole lot. That's to say, if they don't get them right, they won't be understood very well. And there are aspects of pronunciation that matter a whole lot less. This goes for speakers of any language. And if one can focus on those without paying too much attention to looking for a native speaker type accent, that's not what's wanted at all. You want to get right the bits that could cause some confusion. And perhaps one of them, I've got again, a bee in my bonnet about pronunciation teaching.
Let it loose. Bees and bonnets is what this whole podcast is about.
Pronunciation teaching has focused forever on teaching people to pronounce. Actually, my problem in a country where I speak a bit of the language is not my pronunciation. They can work out what I'm saying. My problem is I can't understand what they're saying. And this is a standard problem, isn't it? Where we go, they can understand us, we can't understand them. Why can't we understand them? Why I can't understand European Portuguese is because they do very funny things with the consonants.
I've only listened minorly to some European, like Portuguese from Portugal. I've very, very little, because there's such a wide range here in Brazil. I'm in São Paulo, which is in the southeastern area. And if I go too far south, then I can't really understand the accent, the regional accents. If I go too far north, I can stay within a radius and understand what's happening.
Big country. But the routine story is that Brazilian Portuguese is stress-timed. So it's got a fairly da-da-da-da-da-da sort of rhythm. And European Portuguese is stress-timed, so which means that European Portuguese speakers speaking English, they may not give enough emphasis, enough clarity to unstressed syllables, because the unstressed syllables in European Portuguese are very unstressed indeed.
Okay. So sorry. So you said, so then the Brazilian Portuguese is generally understood as syllable timed, where the Portuguese in Portugal is stress. So, okay.
That's I mean, that's what I've read. I'm not an expert on Portuguese.
I would have to reference. I would need samples.
My point here is that if we're teaching people English pronunciation, should we be spending almost all our time on teaching them to pronounce? Or should we be spending most of our time on teaching them to understand what they hear? For instance, many people have trouble understanding spoken English because the unstressed syllables are not easy for them to perceive. I say, there was a man in the garden, and my, let's say, Spanish student won't hear there was a man in the garden. They'll hear man or la. They'll hear the stressed syllables, and they're not trained through their own language to perceive unstressed syllables. And you can give that kind of training. And in fact, Catherine Walter and I, in the Oxford English Grammar course, built in a complete online training program for teaching people to understand English speech. We didn't want to neglect active pronunciation, but as I've said, I think the big problem for many learners is not their pronunciation, it's how they manage with ours.
And we have so many tools nowadays. That's the thing, is that we have the internet, and we have teachers have innumerable samples of people speaking it from native, non-native, from different regions everywhere, so that this is something that's very tangible that you can do in your classroom. Find a grammar point or something that you're teaching, but that they need to understand that there is differences in the super segmental features and things like that in phonology, and then we can actually use the technology to our benefit at that point.
Yeah, you can indeed. You can actually combine grammar teaching with pronunciation, with perceptive pronunciation teaching terribly well, because grammar structures tend to have auxiliary verbs in which are unstressed, and prepositions and the rest of it. And we actually built into our pronunciation program lessons where people would have to understand a Japanese speaker, a Spanish speaker, North American speaker. I forget the rest, but we had quite a range of these. But I think the big point for me in what you've just said is that the old input poor environment, where people are only getting their English from their 3 hours a week in the classroom and perhaps some tape recordings or film strips, I don't think that's completely disappeared at all, but things are changing enormously, with so many students having access to online speech, as you say, from different kinds of speaker. If they're able to use those resources, we have to remember that not all language learners in all parts of the world do have all those resources for learning the languages they might want to, but very many students do, so they can do an awful lot of listening. And to the extent that I think, looking purely at grammar, some grammar can be picked up almost immediately from exposure, even in the classroom. Some grammar can be picked up, it's harder than that, but it will be picked up correctly from enough exposure around and about. Some grammar is complicated enough so that it actually needs formal teaching. And people designing grammar syllabuses need to bear that in mind. So the input-rich environment that we're all moving into still won't teach everything, but it'll make a hell of a difference.
That's a point to think about. Okay, I'm going to think about that afterwards, because I do have just another couple of questions, because I do want to pick your brain a little bit more. If there's bees in the bonnet, please release them as well. Going back to the article quickly, because you had mentioned a few times the application, and we touched a little bit upon this, but the application of theories and principles, and where we get the information from, I guess I can say, and whether we're using it. there's a lot of claims where the origins are from these new things come from, these theories and principles, and the actual application of those. I guess I'm going to combine a couple of the questions. And how can we, as practitioners, because most people that listen to the podcast and that I interact with are practitioners, not researchers or theorists. And so how can we separate the wheat from the chaff? How can we go through and would you guide us a little bit? How would you guide us into looking at things and being judicious and avoiding pitfalls, I guess?
Yeah. Well, of course, there's no no simple answer to that question.
Well, I expect a point-by-point list.
And you start out by being confused, and then you learn stuff and read stuff and go to talks, and you end up more confused at a higher level. But seriously, I did have the time as a part-time teacher turned materials writer. I found, and I needed the time to look at what was being written by applied linguists, what was coming out of the research laboratories, what was being promulgated by the big figures in the field, the famous names, people who were writing stuff which had an influence. And of course, I went to regular conferences where you got distinguished speakers and less distinguished speakers. And, I felt to a great extent, it's a matter of being sensible. At one extreme, you don't pay very much attention to some nutter who's come in with their theory that they've developed through their own teaching.
I think you referenced crystals in your your article. I chuckled out loud, so congratulations.
Yeah. No, you don't. So, yeah, you ignore that kind of thing. At the other extreme, if something really looks very hard to penetrate, early writing and applied linguistics, about early writing about the communicative approach, I'd read a page of an article and then go back to the top and read it again. And then I think, I'll come back to that tomorrow when I feel stronger. If that's what's happening when you're reading, there's a problem. And the problem is not in you. It's in the person who's telling you what you should be doing, who can't make themselves clear. And I think generally, if people can't make themselves clear, it's because they're not that clear in their own minds either. So I think one try to be a bit more systematic in what I'm saying. You need to be suspicious of what is obviously crap. You need to be suspicious of stuff that looks like over-academic nonsense. Don't just reject it because it looks academic. Academic people write in an academic way, and they may have important things to say to us, but they ought to be able to say them in a way that works for us, for their audience. They need a sense of audience. So look at that, but be suspicious if it doesn't seem to make a lot of sense to you. There may be a very good kinds of guidance for a teacher who's in a different situation from you, is a different kind of person from you. I think what I'm really saying is welcome new ideas, but treat them with a certain amount of suspicion. Don't take them on board. Look and see, does this work for me? Does this make sense? Does it fit in with my own experience? You need to be quite suspicious of your own experience, because people get into, particularly after 5-10 years teaching, they've got their own habits, and they think that their teaching works terribly well because they're good in the classroom, their students like them, everybody seems happy. They may not be teaching terribly well at all. they may be wasting people's time in a very apparently constructive way. So really look at the new ideas, learn what you can. People should be going to conferences, listening to podcasts. So if you're not listening to this, you should be.
It's an exchange of ideas, right? I mean, because I think you mentioned something. Look at something and see if it works for you, because it might not work for your teaching context. And I think that sometimes we as practitioners, some practitioners who are not as maybe strong-minded or stubborn, as my mother would call me, they I'm very stubborn, but some people feel pressured into following something because it works for a certain percentage of the community. But that doesn't mean that it has to be implemented in your teaching practice, because it might not serve your students.
I think it's a very good point. Yeah, people are often rather obedient, not stubborn enough, and they do what they're told by the textbook or their trainers, or the ministry comes out with a decree that everybody should teach like this, and people think, well, what do I know? I'm just a humble little teacher. These people must be right. Story of human politics, like people believing in what they're told by the people with the big mouths. So, yeah, I think that's a very important point. I think self-respect, perhaps, is a word we need here. People should have enough self-respect to respect their own judgments as well as other people's.
And of course, there's a car going by, but it's noisy on my street as always. But I think that sometimes there's a lot of teachers that feel that pressure, and that they should kind of think about themselves a little bit more, and not assume that only because the person is in a prestigious position at a university, or only because the person has this big name and has lots of books. Listen, they've contributed immensely to the field. Of course, we can't say that, oh, disregard them. No, because they have contributed. But just because you are, quote unquote, only a teacher, that doesn't discredit any of your experience, because you know what's happening. Hopefully you know what's happening in your classroom, and hopefully you're reflective on how that impacts your students and seeing their progress. So are you up for one last question?
Oh yeah.
Okay. So you've had what I consider an extremely successful and very prolific career. Reflecting back, you can add any bees in your bonnet. What's something that you've seen or observed that is just commonly misunderstood or misinterpreted, and it's taken hold and gone through the industry?
Let me think back. The teaching that came before the communicative approach was very influenced by behaviorism, stimulus response, practice, drilling, and that that took too much hold over too many materials, too many people, followed by the communicative approach, where suddenly too many people started teaching language functions and didn't do any grammar anymore. So the communicative approach took a stranglehold. Not everywhere, not on everybody, but on a lot of people. At a later stage, all sorts of things came in. I remember strategies was a big cottage industry.
Can you expand on that, just for some people who might not have detailed knowledge?
Going back to when most of the listeners were babies, but it was people started looking at the strategies that are used in communication. So they started making lists of communication strategies, learning strategies, you name it, kind of strategies. And people drew up, I mean, one researcher in particular, who was quite influential, drew up a long list of strategies that had to be taught in the classroom. So people would spend so much time teaching the right kind of strategies for understanding language. They never actually had any time to learn the language.
Oops.
That's the thing that took hold.
Uh-huh.
Task-based learning, of course, has taken very considerable hold. There was a period when the lexical approach was big. So it's based very precariously on a genuine fact of first language acquisition, that people learn their grammar through the vocabulary that comes in. Small children don't get taught grammar. And so the people who favoured the lexical approach felt that this must be so for foreign language learners as well. So you just need to teach a lot of vocabulary in the right kind of way, and the grammar will look after itself. That did some damage. The interest in corpora has done an awful lot of good. It's an enormously valuable development. You'll have, I know you've spoken to Mike McCarthy about this. And
I did
somebody
recently, yes.
And I have great respect for Mike McCarthy, and he's an old friend. But there's also been people who've acted as if using corpora was something completely new, and as if it could be brought into the classroom to make teaching much better. It's not new at all. The great grammarians of the early 20th century, English grammarians, were using very, very big written corpora. People have always analysed language by looking at it in use. It's just that it's become suddenly possible for us to build up enormous corpora, which can be machine processed, if you like, and this gives us a lot more information. I haven't found myself in my own grammar writing that this has transformed what I do. The grammar that I teach, or the grammar that I put in my books, is the grammar that we've been teaching for a very long time. It's pretty well worked out. We have known for a very long time roughly what the order of priority is, how structures are used, and corpus material isn't suddenly telling us, oh, well, you were quite wrong. The present perfect doesn't get used like that at all. It gets used quite differently. But no, it helps us to refine our rules, to get rid of bad ones. There are a lot of bad rules around, which are based on insufficient evidence. It tells us a lot about vocabulary frequency, but vocabulary frequency was a big thing when I was writing in the early 80s. There'd been a lot of work done on vocabulary frequency. Of course, it's done much better now, but we're not suddenly finding that a word like prestidigitation is actually more common than a word like butcher. It isn't.
No, it's not.
We knew that already.
Good. I'm glad we've clarified that. You heard it here first. Yeah, it seems a lot of. I just wanted your take on it, of things that kind of stood out in your mind, because it seems as if not so much that things are misunderstood or maybe misinterpreted, that they're one singular point is extrapolated to a degree in which it actually doesn't. It becomes fantastical sometimes.
That's a nice way of putting it. Yeah, you often get the impression from reading or listening to experts that it's all about one thing. the secret to effective language teaching is this or that or that or that. I've been through all those revolutions. Language isn't just one thing, and using language isn't just one thing. And different bits of language certainly need to be handled, taught, practiced in different ways. There isn't a simple solution. And those simple solutions are very attractive. Somebody comes along and says, ha, I solved it. All we need to do is this, right?
And social media has made that worse. So social media and the internet has propagated that to a degree which is uncontrollable at this point. So
can I add 2 points that have
absolutely
haven't come up in this conversation, but let me release 2 more bees.
That should be the title of this conversation. Interview with Michael Swan, releasing the bees.
Yeah, one of them is this goes back to my first teaching in France, where I found myself doing some private teaching in a place where the learners of English had 45 hours a year for 2 years. This was because of French legislation, which required big firms to provide free classes in this or that or the other for their employees. So these guys had 90 hours spread over 2 years. I rapidly found that it was no use at all my trying to cover anything like a complete syllabus. I needed to pin down what would help them if they went abroad, what would be most useful to them, and I produced a very, very small syllabus, vocabulary, and the most important thing for me was to give them confidence in using this very small amount of language. I would much rather have my learners do more with less, get good at, comfortable with, feel encouraged by success in something which is really within their grasp, instead of being smashed down the whole time because there's too much to learn and they can't get it right. I had even more of that experience when I was walking in the French Alps with some French people, and we tended to have a big lunchtime break to eat something and recover from the morning's walking. And I said, would you like me to teach you some English in the breaks? So here I was teaching these people, partly by individual talking and partly in a group thing, just occasionally through about 3 weeks in those minimum situations. And I was teaching people who had been through French educational system and come out not being able to speak English. And my job was only to encourage these people to build on what little they knew and develop it, be more comfortable with it. And the thing that brought tears to my eyes was when we stopped off at some place in the we weren't in the Alps at this point. We were in the Himalayas sometimes. So for Alps, and what I said previously, substitute Himalaya. we'd gone walking in the Himalayas, and it was a great trip. But one evening in week 2, the one in the little group who had least English, he'd done a little bit with me, and I'd helped to encourage him. He dropped into a lodge where people were getting sandwiches and beer and the rest of it. And he came out and said, Mike, I can speak English. He'd been talking to some Germans in the lodge, and he'd found he could speak English. And that was nice.
I have experience that resonates with that, because I deal mostly, I don't come from a traditional educational background. I come from a business background and then moved into education. And so I typically deal with business English students, because I have the background, so it makes a natural fit.
Yeah.
And most of my students that I work with have very, very this kind of eureka moments, and it's heartwarming, and you feel so wonderful about it. And what happens is that a lot of our classes are not building on what they know. It's using what they have in a very strategic way so that they can get by in the business world. And they feel wonderful afterwards. And it's so great to see, because they finally realize that they don't have to have all of the phrasal verbs memorized and in their back pocket. They can use what they know in very creative ways and do what they need to do.
That moment when you make it possible for one of your students to do something right and feel good about it, that's transformative. I love that. One last B, if I can let it buzz.
Yes, release the bees, all of them.
Final B. I've got a bunch of Bs in my website has my articles free for downloading, a whole lot of them.
I'm going to put everything in the show notes so that people who listen on Spotify or Amazon, they can just click on it. It'll go right to your site.
Yeah. And I've got one page on that, some things I believe, which is full of things I believe. But one thing that seemed to me terribly important was listen to your students. If you want them to listen to you, you need to listen to them. It's terribly important. Too many teachers, they do all the talking, and their opinions are the ones which are correct. I don't like that. We actually, in one of the levels of the Cambridge course, we built in a session where the students are encouraged to say what they feel about how to learn a language. How do they feel is the best? What do they feel is the best way to learn vocabulary, to learn grammar, to learn pronunciation? What do they feel about language learning? And they're going to come up with some quite naive ideas, but not all the ideas are stupid. And because they don't correspond to the current theory about how you should learn a language, it doesn't mean they're wrong. They may be right. But at the very least, if you get a dialogue going, okay, kids, now you think it's important to learn 100 words a week from a vocabulary list. Well, that may not be a bad idea, but there are certainly other ways of approaching vocabulary as well. Or you think you need lots and lots and lots of grammar practice. Well, let's think about that a bit. How much, what for? If you get a dialogue going, so you listen to the students, they listen to you, their ideas will change, your ideas may change as well. And that's crucial for me. That's it. That's my last B.
I love that last B. I like the negotiation of within the classroom, especially when you work with adult learners. I think it's important to have a little bit of negotiation and talk about, okay, so what's important? Because you don't live their reality. And maybe in their reality, when they're actually using the language, they've noticed that certain things take priority. And if you have this very instantiated view on what you think should be priority, and it's not going to line up with success, I don't think. I would just add to that last point that because you said teachers talk too much, and I agree with you, and that the time in the classes is not yours. It's your students. It's not yours. You're there as a guide, but it's their learning time, so you really can't constantly insert yourself. I want to just thank you enormously for sitting down with me, and obviously you're welcome back anytime if you feel motivated to release any more bees, because this has been delightful and eye-opening, and I've loved to hear your perspective on all of these things. So I want to thank you so much for sitting with me.
Oh, thank you very much. It was worth coming in out of the sunshine.
That is the goal, that we a little less vitamin D, but hopefully some serotonin and happy chemicals. So thank you
Okay.
again, and that's it for us today.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Real Talk in ELT. Want to join the conversation? Head on over to Instagram at Kelly Pennington ELT and send me a message. Be sure to subscribe to my YouTube or Spotify channel to stay up to date, and of course, take care of yourself, your health, your vibe, and your tribe. Until next time.